Hello and greetings from Germany. My name is Oliver Zöllner of Stuttgart Media University, and I'll be talking to you today about new practices or new values, the perspective of digital ethics for living a flourishing life. Here's an overview of what I'll be talking about. I'll start with digitization in context. That is the question, how do we rebuild the world at the moment? Then I'll have a look at the new worldviews or new views of the self that we as humanity are building at the moment. And then finally, my look at thought and action. That is the core question of digital ethics and how it can be used to address these issues. I'll be very brief about digitization in context. How do we actually rebuild the world? Well, digitization now is something that has become very normal to us. It is quite as normal as electric current or tap water, and so it is nothing special anymore. But it has profound effects, of course, on the way that we deal with each other. What once was very close and near is now very distant. There's always a medium in between us and other people. Or think about cultural practices like using picture galleries on Instagram or other platforms and even generating money from it, like this American family Harrison is doing. So this sharing of pictures is also quite something normal, at least for younger people. So we could say that increasingly we're living in an electronic text, not only as individuals, but in society as a whole. The question is just, are we able to decipher and understand this electronic text? Well, here's one of the monikers of digitization, the smartphone. We all carry it with us all the time, or so it seems. It is our ID card and we use it for many things. So this thing, this device that we are using, we could say is transforming people into data carriers. And this transformation, of course, has an effect on society, on our culture, on the way that we communicate, and the way that we dominate other people or are dominated by the smartphone or by the powers that be, for example, the tech companies. Now, against this background, here are a few hypotheses about this normalcy of the electronic text. We could say that our social and individual relationships regarding online technologies are at the moment very much characterized by nihilism, by nothingness in a way, by neglect or avoidance. Currently, we observe a revaluation of values. That is, we haven't yet negotiated the necessary value orientations for living in digital environments. We're still sort of stuck in analog thinking. Secondly, we could say that instead we have created digital technologies that even allow us, quite conveniently, to not be who we are and to not need to think about who we are or what we could be. So this is really very convenient, and that is why we love digitality so much. Because actually there's a split, there's a rift between being and acting. Because if our being and the way that we do things are not on a par, that means we are not responsible. We don't have responsibility for our actions, and that is a childlike status of development, we could even say. So this is very convenient. It's wonderful to be children again, and that is how we are acting in digitality in a way. My second hypothesis would be, we must relearn to think about ourselves. What does it mean to be a human being? For what purposes do we want to use technologies in the first place? And what are our objectives? That sounds very easy or simple, but it isn't quite so easy because not so many people have come up with appropriate answers. So what is our aim with regard to technologies? What is the why of technological pursuits, as the American philosopher Nolan Gertz has formulated it. Our collective disposition so far is simply, oh, if it's digital, it is superior, and that is good enough then. But is that true? Well, Sherry Turkle has said, we live in the state of being alone together. We are permanently networked, but actually quite atomized. That is, living apart from each other, and really many people are fearful of commitments vis-a-vis other people. Plus, there is a constant pressure for self-representation. Think of Family Harrison. We always feel we must show ourselves to the rest of the world, to fill voids, to fill the gaps that perhaps indicate that we would not be there or not be present enough. And thirdly, we are losing the capability or perhaps the will to look each other in the eye, which is, of course, a part of dehumanization, if you will. Now, what does this tell us about humanity? So here's my second chapter where I'll look at the new worldview or the new view of the self that has come along ever since the arrival of digitality. The old promise of digitality was always to connect people. But actually, if we think about it, no, it is about connecting data. And that is what is creating perhaps a new view of the human self. Now, using TikTok and Instagram and WhatsApp and Twitter and Snapchat and whatever we have, that does something to us. We could say it is quite a profound change that Canadian media theorist Marshall McLuhan had envisaged about 50 years already, so before the arrival of mass media computers like we have them today. It is this gradual shift from linear print culture, you know, where things have consequences and we think in linear terms, to a more circular networking structure of society, not only of society, but also of thinking, of things happening simultaneously all the time and where everything is linked to everything else. So this is, I think, something that has come true under the conditions of digitality. But that also means that we are living in a different position with regard to other people or with regard or in the context of society. What we, ever since Western Enlightenment, would call the autonomy of people, that is, the notion of an individual self, is gradually shifting over to a more complex network of a relational self, as Charles S. has called it. So that is the gradual replacement of the idea of human autonomy by the idea of a more networked heteronomy. That is where I, as a person, as an individual person, will always be looking at, oh, where do I stand in relation to other people and what is happening right now? And this, of course, is increasingly shaped by algorithms, or what we call artificial intelligence, that will link us not only with other people, but also with other people's ideas, or perhaps ideas set by, well, the artificial intelligence itself. So perhaps this is in an historical view, the most profound change, where in older times we would be living in a theocentric, that is a God-focused world, you know, where superior beings, no matter of what religion, but where superior beings would guide us and our thinking, and we would be living in relationship with these superior beings. Well, after that came the idea of Western Enlightenment with the autonomous individual self, where the I was in the middle, so a homocentric worldview with humans as focus. And now gradually we would be living in a data-centric world, so where let's call it a system is supreme, where a system is ruling our thought and action. Not completely, of course, we are still partly autonomous, but increasingly we are sliding over into this networked world of algorithms and artificial intelligence trying to steer our modes of thinking and relation. Paradoxically, this is something that tells us things about ourselves. We are, in digitality, more communicative as ever and more networked. And there are all those offerings that are really catering to the individual. But if you think about it, the individual as a real-life person becomes increasingly meaningless. The individual data point is only interesting as part of a larger data set, that is, as part of a crowd of millions of people, and not so much as an individual. So this is the paradox about individualization in data modernity. But that is, of course, something we need to address, because the future focus needs to shift back to a form of humanistic digitality, where the man and woman are, of course, in the focus of our thinking, where human intelligence is at the heart of our thinking and not so much artificial intelligence. Well, artificial intelligence, or what we call artificial intelligence, I don't know if it's really intelligent at all, but it can provide us with many services that might be very beneficial, so I'm not totally against this. But I think we must stand clear of just focusing on this artificial intelligence alone. Because the key question will always be, whether with regard to digitization or any other technology, what problem is it solving or capable to solve? And that is, I think, where human intelligence is far superior to so-called artificial intelligence. And we as humans, we need to think about the question, well, what do we need all these digital tools for? What do we want to do with them? It seems very obvious, but this simple-sounding question, again, is quite difficult to answer if you think about it. And secondly, what do we do about the fact or the possibility that in the future we won't be dealing with humans exclusively? So how can we envisage or plan for a society that is at least partially and partly being not dominated perhaps, but at least deeply infused with artificial intelligences, chatbots, for example, robots, etc., etc. We must have an idea about what kind of society this is supposed to be like then. We need to navigate the future and these challenges. And in order to be able to do so, we need a value-based ethical framework for being human, for all our fallibilities, but also for thinking about aspects like freedom, creativity, education, values, yes, and human intelligence. We need to re-cherish human intelligence, I feel. That is important. So these will be competences in the future data sphere that we need to focus on. And I think this is where digital ethics comes into play. You know, how do we as humans design our thought and action? Or how ought we to design our thought and our action? Well, this is always, we could say, a three-step process, starting with the motivation, leading to an action that then has consequences. The motivation, we would always say, is a form of habitus or disposition. And the key question is always, what kind of human being do I want to be? Not only individually, but also in society. On the level of action, the issues of rights and duties are addressed. How should I, but also how should others, be acting? What will be right? What will be wrong? What are our higher orientations, you know, in our action? And then thirdly, consequences. Well, what's the effort and what's the revenue? What do I get out of my action and what do others get out of it? what's the net result of all this? So these are things that we also need to address. And of course, as you can see, these three steps pertain to classic concepts in Western philosophy. The motivation or disposition aspect deals with virtue ethics of the Aristotelian kind. That is, our relationships and our striving in everyday practice, case by case, day by day, to become excellent human beings with a like-wide predisposition or habitus. Not so easy to do, as Aristotle told us 2,500 years ago. Only at the end of our lives will we be able to look back upon our life and say if we have reached this good disposition, and if we have indeed reached this, well, good life, as he called it. On the level of actions, well, this is pertaining to deontology or duty ethics. Immanuel Kant would be one protagonist of this thinking in Western philosophy. So this is about the promises we make about our rights and duties, and also about the absolute and non-negotiable qualities. So the higher things that we as humans need to have in our thinking and in our hearts in a way. The consequences, they well point at consequentialism or utilitarianism. That is an aspect or a line of Western philosophy that weighs the costs and benefits of actions for the largest happiness of the largest number of people, as Adam Smith 250 years ago famously phrased it. Well, that is the more economically oriented aspect of ethics or philosophy. But all of these three lines of Western philosophy taken together, they all address the larger issue of society. What kind of society, collectivity, or we do we want to build? And what is our place as humans, our place in this larger society? What is our position? How do we form social networks, not only in the digital meaning of the word, but also in the pre-digital meaning of the word? How do we network with other people? So we need to develop ideas and models for how to live with and how to live in digitality and who we want to be. So we need to formulate objectives, aims. We also need to develop ideas and models for what roles digital technologies ought to have. So what competences we need to build in the future. And we need to develop ideas and models for how we want to enforce this. How do we want to put this through? That is a question of regulation. And, well, if I look at our world, our digital world, it is a truism that very little in digitality is actually being regulated because it's so difficult for states to regulate digital tools and devices and platforms. And that is why very often we've given up. But we shouldn't. Because for all of these three ideas and models, we need human intelligence more than ever. So this is why I say we need to develop a humanistic data sphere in the future and for the future. So going back to Immanuel Kant, we should actually say, oh yes, digital tools are always only a means and never an end. The overall end is the human being, the individual, and that is never just a means. To quote Kant, the practical imperative of thinking should thus be, act that you use humanity, whether in your own person or in the person of any other, always at the same time as an end, never merely as a means. And that is, I think, quite in opposition to how, for example, digital platforms, the data platforms like Facebook, Instagram, etc., use our data. They use us as a resource, but it should be the other way round. So, we need to develop ethics as a system for reflection with the guiding question, what kind of people do we want to be? And what problems do we need to look at? and hopefully resolve. So that ends my presentation. Thank you for bearing with me and enjoy the rest of the conference. Bye-bye.